Sorry, one more question. Should we do the housing first or the disaster?
Hmm.
Um,
Great question. I think because we are already as a one group thing, we will introduce each other and let's start talking about both the factors and see where they intertwine. Because that would be, as in trying to segregate housing and disaster right now is going to be a big issue. What do you
I
think,
agree.
Hussain?
I agree. I'm fine with anything. Absolutely.
Cool.
Okay then.
So hi guys, my name is Dhiren, and here with us is Hussain as well. We are both the moderators on this group, the breakout group for housing and disaster. Uh, Quickly, the experts that we have over here, I'm just going to them quickly. We have Bilal Khan. He is a rights activist based in Mumbai, and he has been doing activism and working with communities for over 6 years now. And he has focused on housing, basic amenities, and rehabilitation of slum dwellers. Uh, so his work that is happening in Mumbai and around India is commendable, and he's one of the experts. The second expert that we have is Mr. Anand Jagtap, and he's worked for almost 20 years as an officer on special duty in the MCGM, that's the Municipal Corporation of Greater Mumbai. And he has worked extensively on the issues of community participation in slum sanitation, which includes collaborating with the MCGM in the construction, maintenance, and sustainability of public toilets. He is also somebody who's pivotal in the forming of the Federation of CBOs, which is involved in running community toilets. Okay. He has earlier experience of being with the Women Development Corporation of the state of Maharashtra for 6 years. So welcome both Bilal Khan and Anand Jagtap. Our two other experts are Mr. Anil Hebbar. He is the managing trustee of Helping Hands Charitable Trust, and he has been an entrepreneur as well as a pharma professional for decades. He generally does a lot of philanthropic work, which include several disaster related help, from cyclones to COVID to cloudbursts or even landslides. Okay, and he is providing relief and establishing hospitals or reviving livelihoods of rural and tribal communities. So he's somebody who comes from the disaster management background. And Professor Lawrence Surendra. He is a professor and a council member at the Sustainability Platform Asia. He's skilled in sustainable development, research design, program evaluation, lecturing, and editing. And he has closely worked with senior advisor, he has worked closely with and has been the senior advisor to the Stockholm Environment Institute in Sweden. He also has worked with UN SCAP and UNESCO in Bangkok. And his Professor Lawrence Surendra is also one of our experts for today's session on disaster as well as on housing. The two moderators, let me introduce Hussain. Hussain is a teacher and urban researcher with Kamla Raheja Vidyanidhi Institute of Architecture, and he is the coordinator of research and consultancy cell at the institute. His work is focused on urban politics and ideology, planning, epistemology, politics of land and housing, and urban political economy. My name is Dhiren. I am a outdoor professional, and for the last 12 years, I have been learning and teaching wilderness and first aid related courses. I teach people how to save lives, how to use basic tools that you have, resources that you have to make sure that you can keep a person alive, at least you manage to get them to definitive medical care. And with that, I use these skills in disaster management. So the room is now open for everybody. Please start your session.
Then just, I think two of our speakers are missing. Mr. Anand Jagtap and Professor Lawrence Surendra, have they joined us? I think they're not here. So it could be that they have some trouble in finding the room. So Nalini probably want to check if they're maybe in the other the main room, and if you can help
Right,
them
sir.
to
I'll
come
just
here.
find out, sir.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Okay.
Experts already in the room, and both from different, one from housing, one from disaster management.
So good, we can get started.
Yes.
Bilal has worked also uh, in disasters, because he was involved in um, the the flood that had happened, the landslide that had happened in Malad, and recently again this year. So he has experience in both. So Bilal, probably you want to talk maybe in 5-7 minutes about these experiences.
All right. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. Uh, I was thinking only about talking housing, but yes, I will also share my experience of working in the Malad wall collapse and other disaster hit areas like the Manpur, where the fire just took place, and it is a like a continuous process every year, every like in a several time in a year it happens. Why it happens, we can talk about it. uh, as far as housing is concerned, so can there many stories can be told, and but I was thinking of focusing on how people's movement, how housing movement have like from demanding recognizing of right to housing to actually getting it delivered, and then what has happened in between. So in the 8 year of my work in the housing sector, I've realized I've worked on at two levels. One is to ensure that the communities, the urban poor communities, the service guild of the city, every city, who are branded as encroachers, and with other negative terminologies, always, constantly face the threat of demolition, eviction. They are always, no matter what, but they are always considered as an outsider, so so, like two levels are, one is to stop, eviction, stop demolition, until and unless the communities are offered proper rehabilitation. And second, to when the rehabilitation has been, sorry, when the demolition has been stopped, ensure that, they get properly rehabilitated. So, in both the situations, the living condition, the standard of living has deteriorated, has been very bad, since like for example, in the case where when we stop eviction, people continue to live in subhuman condition with limited access to water, electricity, sanitation. So that is one problem, that even if we work hard, we mobilize communities, community face authorities, there's confrontation, there's a lot of backlashes, and then after that they when they finally get saved from the demolition, their like living standard remains bad. But when when they get rehabilitated, the situation also doesn't improve. The rehabilitation, we have still not understood, our authority have still not understood the true meaning of rehabilitation. And the rehabilitation should be done in a manner that their living standard from what they were living in informal settlement in Basti should improve and not deteriorate. But in our experience, it has been that their living standard has gone down whenever they get rehabilitated. Whether we take example of Mahol or other rehabilitation sites like Malwani, Mankur, the layout first in the rehabilitation process, there are problem at multiple levels. One is the layout of the building. Rehabilitation building is so bad that living there become pathetic. I think Hussain will be able to explain better, the condition in the rehabilitation building is not conducive for living, because there is very limited ventilation. The provision of basic amenities like water, electricity, like in case of Mahul, the water pipeline and the sewage pipeline, the water were mixing at some point. So that kind of water is there, and then there is no connectivity to the rest of the city. There is no connectivity to the public transport system, so their connectivity get disrupted. Then since there is no connectivity in the rehabilitation sites, their livelihood also get affected badly. And most of the far away, the rehabilitation sites which are at a distant places, schools and hospitals are also not present in the vicinity, so their access to education and healthcare is also get affected. So we are seeing that just by providing a house, and that too of a bad quality, doesn't solve a problem. I think we should now think beyond just giving a house in lieu of a house. We should we should redefine the definition of housing, as well as we should try to understand the meaning of true rehabilitation. And in from the Mahul case, Mahul is one of the toxic neighborhood, is the most toxic neighborhood of Bombay. And I think Mankur, we can also call it Mankur as one of them. We have not studied. I think we should also study Mankur. Mankur also has multiple sources of pollution, and life is also similar. As far as health issues are concerned, I think it's the same as Mahul. But in the case of Mahul rehabilitation site, we have understood that not only the layout and then planning is important, but also we also have to see that the environment should be conducive for living. For example, in Mahul, since it is an industrial neighborhood, the rehabilitation site, the distance between the rehabilitation site and the industrial units, is very less. It's just 15 meters away. So they are this planning is not at all good from the point of view of security, as well as safe and clean environment. So and the polluted environment has actually claimed lives of hundreds of residents in Mahul. So we have to keep in mind everything that that is required to ensure a dignified and safe life whenever we are talking about rehabilitation. So that's so I basically wanted to just highlight. I think it's time that people's movements, organizations, academics, anything works toward. I think we still have to go a long way in terms of establishing housing right. But at the same time, we also have policies for rehabilitation, and partially recognizing housing right. So at the same time, we should also put our energies to ensure that rehabilitation should be done in proper sense, where people should not die when they get rehabilitated. At least we should ensure this. And so that's what I basically wanted to point out. And as far as the disaster aspect Hussain wanted me to talk is I think I have very limited experience in dealing with these cases, and I think, but I think most of us from Bombay, understand this aspect. And as far as the urban poor communities are concerned, I think they are all prone to, you know, disaster as far as landslide and flooding is concerned, because and I think I just forgot the figure, but like a substantial, there's a substantial population living in in Mumbai, in the landslide prone areas, and there's no safety protocols. Like there's no planning for those lakhs of people who are living in landslide prone area, and like to how to save these people in event of disaster. For example, in Malad, when the wall collapsed due to flooding, the Malad is also like in Ambedkar Nagar in Pimpri-Pada. This place, the disaster was caused by flooding and subsequent collapsing of wall. But this site is also prone to, somewhat landslide. So. So there was no disaster response in this area. Like, we have details, like we conducted a fact finding there, and we have details of how they did not get any response from police, and a delayed response from police and fire department, and then how the local resident had to themselves organize themselves and look for ways to save their lives. Access to hospitals was not public hospital was not there, because they are so far at a distant places. They are far away, so they had to rely on private hospitals. I'm talking about midnight, when this disaster took place, and most of the hospitals were closed. So whatever limited access they had of private hospitals, and those who could, very small people, like a number of people who could afford, were able to get that access, and majority just had to spend night on road, in the open. So that is there. And then we also, I think, I don't know how way to talk about the Manpur fire case or not, but it's still a very difficult question. Like, this fire, I think most of us who from Bombay must have read this news of fire took place in Manpur, I think, yesterday or day before yesterday. So which is a everyday has become everyday phenomena of how to deal with that thing. I won't go in much details, but yes, as far as I think, we can talk about the huge amount of people living in landslide prone area, and without any disaster management plan. So I'll stop here. Thank you so much for giving me the time.
Thanks, Bilal. So Anil?
Mr. Surendra and Mr. Anil have also joined in. Hi.
Okay.
Yeah, hi.
Hello.
I can come in whenever you want.
You should. Both of you can come in whenever you want.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a few introductory remarks.
Mm-hmm.
I will first of all send website lists to Anand to you all at Sprouts later.
Mm-hmm.
There's one organization called Rhymes in Bangkok inside the IIT, which basically set up for advanced disaster predictions. It was set up after the Asian tsunami. And they're doing a fantastic job, and they also do training of people in farmers and others to have 24/7 predictions and so forth. This is in terms of advanced warning. And of course, the UN ESCAP, where I've also conducted regional learning programs, has done quite amount of work on disasters, and there's a lot of database available there, which will be worthwhile for you all, Bombay, elsewhere to do it. That is number two. Particularly, somebody talked about, I think Bilal Khan talked about slides, landslides, and so on. There is a lot of information, and I've been actually telling places like Coorg and so on, which have the same type of slopes, like Sri Lanka and Malaysia, where these kind of disasters happen, is likely to happen. My or our perspective should be from the point of view of disaster risk reduction. Because as I said in my earlier session, disasters are becoming more, are happening and they're becoming more frequent. That is, the gap between one disaster and the next disaster is shorter, and the second disaster is more intense than the first. Literature is available on that. Now, in a big city like Bombay, of course, every state has a disaster management committee and agency and so on, CDMA, I think it's called. They normally get, for Namkawasi's sake, some well-eminent, known eminent citizens and so on. But I think we could make sure that there's interaction from active organizations like yours in terms of people knowing such an organization exists, what is the kind of information they're putting out, particularly like Bilal Khan talked about, the more marginalized communities, because in every disaster, the worst affected people are the poor people and the people who are not taken care of. They can go and do some immediate relief, provide some food packets and so forth, then they are forgotten. So in putting CDMA on the public thing, making people aware, and also in that sense, making them more accountable. Accountable is not the correct word, but more linked to populations is very important. Find out if they have a website in Marathi, how much of it is happening, maybe have regular meetings and so forth. The other part, which is much more difficult, but there are training programs for that, and TSP Asia has been thinking for a long time to run course on disaster risk reduction, because you're well connected with resources within the region and elsewhere. And I've also done some work for ESCAPE on this. It's the whole question of disaster mapping, which can be done only through community organizations. People like Anil have had, and Bilal also, had very good experience post-COVID working with community organizations in the COVID relief. Now, I think a similar thing should be done maybe in collaboration with Sprout or something, to start doing some disaster mapping. First of all, check out what maps the state itself has. How much of it is accessible? How much can people access it, whatever it is they're supposed to be doing? Then risk what are called vulnerability areas, which is part of disaster risk reduction. Vulnerability areas, and also make a list or map the type of vulnerabilities, whether it's, Bilal talked about some wall collapsing and some mudslides and so on. That's one type. But I think now we know health disasters are also there. I talked in my previous session about how after floods, the massive outbreak of diseases like typhoid, cholera, and so forth. This is going to cause a huge problem in cities, because epidemiologically, we are not at all trained or work even with workers to do it. And I'm sure people like I keep mentioning Anil, because we work together on many things and we're co-moderating this session. Bilal and others have had experience. I think there should be people working on health, civic issues, civic meaning civil engineering issues, so on. Building collapses are beyond our control because of the failure of regulation. And I don't know where to classify such disasters, because failure of regulation also causes all this. But that's too much for groups like ours to handle. But I think what we should do is disaster risk reduction in terms of vulnerable communities, disaster mapping for vulnerable communities, and number 3, making sure that vulnerable communities have access through internet, email, or WhatsApp, whatever, to state resources. And talk to ministers like the minister who spoke yesterday, saying that regular information should be given to prevent human. Like, see, in the Orissa disaster, that famous commissioner, story of it was written in the New York Times. In the last the Orissa cyclone, he had done such fantastic preparation. Only one person died directly. If anybody, few more died, it because of their own foolishness that we can't prevent. So this is something that we can do and we need to do, because there is no going back. I'm sorry, but this is the situation that is. Bombay will be flooded. Bombay will have disasters. Also being a coastal city, So we need to work from the experience of coastal cities. So these are just some remarks I want to make. And you can always get back to me to see what literature I can give you, what can be done, whether we can actually do with state agencies on vulnerability mapping, disaster risk reduction mapping, because these need to be done. And, in the Madras tsunami, there was a Tamil boy working in Singapore who heard that the tsunami started in Indonesia. And he knew that the path of the tsunami would go to South India, Pondicherry. He's from close to Pondicherry. Immediately called up his relatives there, and then they announced it on public speakers, and the entire village evacuated. Nobody lost lives there. So these are examples we have, and I think we have to make disaster preparedness and disaster risk reduction an integral part of our activities. No more it is emergency and relief, but everyday activity. Sorry, I took some time, but I thought I should make these points as we go along. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Surendra. Mr. Anil, you want to talk about your experiences about in disaster relief?
Yeah, so I have been into disaster relief from 1990 or so. The first experience I got was during the massive cyclone in Nellore and Guntur in the then Andhra Pradesh. That was 1990. And then I have been also active during the Kutch, the Bhuj earthquake, the Latur earthquake, the Nepal earthquake, and then recently during the Nisarga cyclone, the Kerala floods. So all these so-called natural disasters are mostly, if you think about it, they are man-made disasters. Otherwise, that type of loss of life and damage cannot happen if we plan for it properly. As Professor Lawrence said, we are just not capable of handling any type of disaster. We are not prepared in advance. We only try to do some first aid after the event it has been done. For example, in Mumbai itself, we know what the development of the Bandra Kurla complex did for the flooding of the entire city. It pinched off the flow of the river to the sea, and now we know what happens every time it rains. So we just don't think through what will happen because of our projects and things like that. Now the coastal road, I'm not wrong in saying that the hero of Array is the villain of coastal roads. We don't think about what is going to happen to the city once this fancy pet projects of our politicians come into fruition. So I think if you think of disasters on a larger scale, not just restricted to Mumbai, we need to get the local youths trained very well to handle the situation. We have manpower. We talk of the average age being pretty low in India, but none of them know what to do in an emergency. We don't maintain our systems. We don't make them work. Bilal spoke about the fires in Mankud. I'm sure many of these places have fire extinguishers, but none of them are maintained. When there's a fire, you try to use a fire extinguisher, it doesn't work. And even if it works, the person in there doesn't know how to use a fire extinguisher. So what is the point in having all these just for show if you don't know how to use it, and if it can't be used when there's a fire? This is how we have been like preparing ourselves for disasters at the moment. And then when we talk of floods and earthquakes, the first major thing that happens every time is a shortage of drinking water. Apart from loss of lives and all that, there's an absolute scarcity of drinking water everywhere. When there is floods and water everywhere, but there's no water to drink. Even in Konkan, that was the problem. So why can't we think through these and address these issues before the disaster happens? At least the eastern coast of India is pretty well equipped and experienced now to prepare for disasters. As Lawrence said, there's only loss of one life during the cyclone in Orissa. So they're pretty well prepared. They've got these shelters built in every few kilometers. So as soon as there's an alarm, people move to the shelters, and at least you can prevent loss of lives. But the west coast of India is absolutely unprepared for any type of disaster. And then some of the things like the fancy for making infrastructure projects, they're cutting through the Konkan like anything and making big roads where in the hills, and because of that there's so many landslides. This round of floods and landslides we had in Konkan is purely because of the development of highways in the area. And so when will we learn from all these disasters? I think we will never learn. So I think not just the government, the civil society has a very major role to play in pressurizing the government to be prepared for all these disasters. We have a major role in sensitizing the people, in training the people. We cannot just leave it to the government and say that it's not our job. I think all of us should come together and train our youth in being ready to handle any type of eventualities. From my own experience, like during the COVID, Bilal and I, Lara, we worked together and we had so much of experience. Like we were wanting to distribute ration kits, and the government just sat on it. Like they had overflowing stocks in the FCI godowns, but none of the ration shops were open for more than 2 months. They said that they have enough ration and the trucks have all come to the market yard, but they didn't realize that there were no laborers, workers left to unload the trucks and bring it to the ration shops. So there's absolutely no planning. Even though we have enough grains in the godowns, they rot away, the rats eat into them, but then the people are still hungry and dying of hunger. That's the type of situation we are in today. So we need to sit and on a very micro level, we need to plan these things out and make sure that each and every segment, like any small part of the country you take, we're all prepared for natural disasters because we don't know when that will hit us. So I think I will end with this, and like just another small example of how we worked. I want to tell the network should be very, very strong. And so we have been thinking of starting something called the Youth Emergency Service, where we have a network spread all across the country. It will be a network of organization, network of people who are willing to help out in times of disaster. Recently, during the avalanche in Chamoli in Uttarakhand, within 2 hours, we had a team which was there, and we had started the community kitchen. And something happened which we never expected. The NDRF people who were rushed into the area by the government themselves did not have anything to eat because there were no rations available. There were no roads in which you could move provisions. So our community kitchen saved the day, and a lot of the NDRF people also would take their food from our community kitchen. So this is the type of things that civil society can do, and really we can be prepared and help in any type of disaster situation.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Anil.
Mr. Hebbar?
So, yeah, Dhiren, go ahead.
No. I was saying the same thing. I said, like, thank you, Mr. Hebbar. That's like a lot of stuff that we got to know. A little bit from my experiences in the past. I have seen communities come together and form such small teams, and I've seen this in the US in smaller villages where the state-run services are very, very rather not there. So ambulances, fire brigades, emergency responses are things that are voluntarily run by the communities over there. And a lot of these guys, they are training and keeping themselves updated, maybe on their own funds. So yes, your idea about starting a community wherein we can all interact and have the best resources with the youth, so that something like the landslide where you in Uttarakhand, when the landslide, you had your community kitchen started. Something like that can easily be set up in areas like Maharashtra or the entire western coast, or even small coming down to Mumbai. So yeah, great. I think I would be really, I would like to volunteer for something like that as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I was just reflecting on the three speakers and what they spoke about, and it's interesting that Mr. Anil mentioned that these are not natural disasters; they are man-made disasters, and that's an important point that has been made. I mean, you know, in a way, all of these disasters are actually planning disasters. It's a failure of anticipating what might happen if something, if there is a flood, if there is a landslide, there's an earthquake, and so on. Mr. Surendra mentioned regulatory failure, which was an important point as well, building collapses and so on. Bilal spoke about the wall collapse. It's interesting that Malad wall collapse was actually had nothing to do with, should not be a site of flooding, it's a hill. And there was a reservoir on top of the hill, which was protected by a compound wall. And because the site was on a hill, when it rained, water accumulated because of the wall. There were no culverts to let the water pass, and the wall eventually collapsed, killing so many people. So the way planning is done in the city, I speak from the perspective of Mumbai, is that there is a focus on large infrastructure projects like the coastal road and so on, but the inability of the planning system to think about or anticipate the kinds of problems that might emerge, the kind of disaster risks that the city faces, and then prepare for it. That, I think, is what makes these natural events into disasters, and that's an important thing that came up through the three speakers. Also, to touch upon the point that Dhiren, you mentioned about communities, coming together to respond to these crises. I think that's a very important aspect of how people cope with disasters. But I think we also need to think about how our plans can anticipate these at a larger level, rather than to wait for communities to come together and deal with them once they happen. Many of these responses are due to the failures of the government or the failures of the of our planners and infrastructural systems and administrators and so on. So I think we also need to engage with policy and planning at the larger level, and then think about what happens when such natural events do take place. Yeah, that's it. So thanks a lot to all the three speakers for really bringing in very important perspectives. I think Dhiren and Bilal both have their hands raised.
So I just quickly wanted to say that Mr. Surendra also wanted to come in. Yes, Bilal, I see your hand up as well, and you should be talking. And the other participants, please feel free to ask questions and interact. You can raise your hands, and we can look at getting you to interact with us and the experts. Professor Surendra and Bilal, you can please take over.
Bilal, you want to go ahead?
You can go ahead.
The others can also comment, then I'll come make a few points.
All right. No, I just wanted to comment on the community response. So see, I think community response is very much required. We cannot do away with it. Yes, but we are against we are against that. Only community response is required and no state responsibility is there. So that is one point I wanted to make. But second is, as far as community response in Mumbai is concerned, in urban communities is concerned, like Dhirendra was talking about community-led response. They had this whole infrastructure of where they were equipped with ambulances and other things required to deal in the event of disaster. But in Mumbai, especially in urban, like in slum communities, I don't think it is possible. And over the years, we have also observed that the communities in Bombay, in urban community, don't want to invest in those kind of infrastructure because they don't have resources. Second, they also think that these communities are transitory in nature. There is a constant threat of demolition, and then there is also no cooperation from the authorities if they want to do something community led. So in case of in Mumbai, it is even though if they want to develop some kind of infrastructure in dealing with event of disaster, it is not possible. So we should also keep this in mind and think of ways of how to deal with this situation. So that's all I wanted to comment. Thanks.
Can I come in?
Yes, please.
Yeah. No, I just want to follow up on what Anil had said about youth emergency services. I think it's extremely good. One way of going about it is I mean, I get the impression that you people in Bombay have a very good civil society strength in many ways. Plus, there are some institutions like some people in IITs and others who will also come in. Is to do a generic model of a youth employment, emergency service in some highly disaster-prone area and develop it as a model for rest of Bombay and for the rest of the country. Because the point is, when we participate in these meetings and we have our experiences, where ideas, we talk about it. But one problem always remains: how do we communicate and disseminate this to a larger public and in local languages, whether it be Marathi, Kannada, whatever. Some kind of disaster mapping for India exists. Then if we know it, then we can high priority do that. So first, a generic model for such things. Second is, don't forget the local government and local corporators. However corrupt corporators and local politicians are, there may be one or two who will find some other vested interest investment in terms of participating in such activities, which we need to get through. And in the previous session, Anand mentioned about bringing out some kind of climate handbook out of these sessions. Now, possibly what can be done either with it or separately, Sprouts and TSP and Bilal, others, initiatives there can join together and do a booklet called Disaster Risk Reduction and Disaster Preparedness. The major point that we got to address is the cost of the post-disaster part. The 2015 flooding in Tamil Nadu, in Madras, cost $50 billion. Okay. Now, insurances, of course, are now wondering how to. They've been very badly affected, meaning they've had to make major payouts. But I think an insurance system should also be developed for the poor people, group insurance, collective insurance, on which also some work has been done, in which there also will get some insurance when this thing happens. So I think a separate booklet on disaster risk reduction and disaster preparedness we can do. We will all try to help in, put in. We can do it online. We can give you some online publishing platforms in which you can go put your stuff. Other people can read those things. We can introduce you to. But something we need to do. Hopefully, the northeast monsoon will pass for you in Bombay and me in Mysore. So far, we are safe. I'm not in Bangalore. I hope that will happen. But we should be now starting for the next monsoon, the northeast monsoon in next November, December. It is going to be worse. It's going to be worse than this. The Tamil Nadu discussions I'm following, they say, look, we can't repair the damage that's done. It will take us 10 years to resolve the problem. Immediately, we can take short-term mitigation measures. Mitigation also has become a kind of rhetoric and slogan in the climate change discussions. But we got to bring mitigation right down to the ground level. Okay. So let's see if we can work together, one with Anil and Bilal and Dhiren and all the others, on a generic model on a youth emergency service in the context of Bombay. So one will be practical, it will have an outcome, plus it will produce something that can be shared with others, where the kind of experiences different people spoke can also be there. Second, let's try and do a separate pamphlet on disaster risk reduction and preparedness, both existing material, new material, and then specific stuff, which maybe people can add, because all the coastal areas are going to face very severe problems. Then I wanted to say one last thing. The disasters are of two types. Short bursts of rain. What has happened is the dry seasons have become shorter, and the wet seasons have become shorter, and the dry seasons longer. So the cycle of the disasters is you get this kind of flooding, then long droughts. Droughts and floods was factored in the thing. It's during the droughts that people migrate from the villages into the cities because they have no other means of. So let's think in these directions, and whatever help we can do on our part, what takes the lead at investment. Thank you.
Okay, we have 4 minutes. Probably we can take a couple of questions from the other participants.
We also have Jayashree, I think, who wants to say something.
Yeah. Thank you, Dhiren, and thank you, everybody. The conversation has been very interesting and very enlightening. I am an educator, and it only left me with big gaping hole in my heart that, you know, as an educator, we never prepared our children or teachers or the community in terms of understanding what is the, you know, how does one safeguard your life and what is life all about? So the disaster, the curriculums don't have it, neither teacher B.Ed programs have it, neither we talked about youth and mobilizing the youth, but we're leaving, can we not do the mobilization through the system? Our curriculums in school, adolescent programs within the school system, and even in college degrees. So these are not optional subjects, but you know, life is, I mean, if you're alive, you can handle the other parts of life, but should that not be aligned with education? What I'm seeing, what I'm hearing everywhere is one aspect of learning cannot be in silos. So somewhere like all this has become outside, no, peripheral, and whereas only core academics is being, you know, there's a pressure only on to get grades. So some kind of linkage with education policy makers and implementers is what I would, you know, like to add in. Yeah.
Can I quickly respond?
Yes,
Very
please.
good suggestion, Jayashree. I think we should get schools and teachers involved. But in my experience of looking at curriculum, there are some states that introduced it to the curriculum, like your environment education, which the Supreme Court ordered. Then it becomes a ritual. Let's not do curriculum. Let's do integration of curriculum where curriculum exists, where if you're teaching a geography course, how do you, we have done some work on that. How do you in a geography course integrate these elements? How do you in a water course or whatever? That's one dimension. The other is when people do extracurricular activities, particularly in schools, older children, there's a question of risk also involved, particularly after 10th, 11th standard, because they're busy for entrance exams and so on. But if those kind of children can be taken to areas post-disaster when it's safe enough to see what's happened and also learn from how poor children have coped up. So I agree entirely with you, Jayashree. There is a lot that can be done in that area. And from our personal experience in Tamil Nadu long back during the communal riots, no major riots, but when communal disturbances happen, we have found the best people to bring harmony is the school teachers, because they are children from both communities, different communities. Those, I think in the sense of disaster also can be done. Maybe the same manual of what I'm talking about, something for schools and for children, which can be used. But you're absolutely correct, Jayashree. We must bring in the education system and its resources into working on this.
Thank you, everyone. We are coming very close to the end of this session. A reminder from the other organizers over here, please do fill in those Google Sheets that they have forwarded to us so that we can have a considerable amount of record of what has happened today over here and coming in from each one. Yes, yes.
I just want to make one point. Somebody asked a question whether there any policy of the government for rehabilitation. Like 2 days back, I was in Alibag for a meeting with the collector. We were going there on behalf of an Adivasi Pada, which entirely got wiped out in the Nisarga cyclone and then again in the floods recently. Now, what the government, the officials themselves are saying is that there is absolutely no policy of rehabilitation. There are just these short-term relief packages, like each one was given 1.6 lakh rupees for whatever they lost. And then the government temporarily put them in the jungle, in shanties. And now the forest department says you can't live in the jungle, you have to go back to your original place. Now, and they themselves are saying that, why don't you hire some experts and make a policy of rehabilitation and then put pressure on the government to pass the legislation. So there's absolutely nothing called a policy now on rehabilitation. It's all temporary short-term first aid measures that are taken.
Thank you, sir, for that. It's the condition of the state and as in the state-run machinery, as well as everybody who are players, like common people like us, is all hodgepodge. Like Mr. Lawrence also said, Mr. Hebbar said that people have become complacent, that because they have not been personally hit by it, they do not consider it as a big thing to be prepared for. until and unless we get people to understand that you could be the next person who could be hit by it, and you don't have to wait for you to get hit by it to start preparing for a disaster. So I think that is something that we should look at. And speaking on both the issues, housing and disaster, I think this has been a very, very interesting breakout room. Professor Surendra wants to add.
Somebody asked the question, what makes the East Coast better prepared than the West Coast? I don't want to sound cynical. East Coast had a slightly longer history of disasters and learned from it. The West Coast is now beginning to have these disasters. So it's not a question of being better prepared, but some lessons learned, as I told you in the Orissa example. But it's quite possible because West Coast will now be the next target. But if you look at climatic stuff, as of now, the East Coast is very vulnerable given the sea mass and the other land, context there. But this does not mean that and also one last point is, which I wanted to say in the morning also, that, we have now created heat islands in our cities because of the vast amount of air conditioning, cars, everything. Heat islands also attract cyclones. Remember that, because the cyclone that is proceeding to the Middle East straight will suddenly in a heat island swing around because the temperature differences are quite big. So, it's our own luxuries also which are creating disasters. So I just wanted to say that the East Coast had earlier history of disasters and is slightly handling it better, but they're not better prepared than the West Coast.
Okay, thank you, Professor Surendra. I think we should bring this session to a close. We've passed our stipulated time. So thank you to all the speakers and the participants. It was very insightful being here and part of this breakout group. And I guess we can go back to the main session. I don't know if there's there is a breakout rooms icon on your lower bar. If you click on that, maybe you can go somewhere else. So thank you, everybody, and see you someday.
Hey guys.